Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long-term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first-of-its-kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey everybody, I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSC Squared podcast. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Happy to be here with you today. We are going to finally make good on our promise this week, Mark, of talking about a subject I think we allude to like every other podcast. We are going to talk. We're jumping into the bedroom and we're talking about healthy sex and toxic sex in a marriage and the difference between those, what they look like, what they don't. I know that for me, this topic seems to come up, not just in the podcast every other week, but is pretty consistent with the majority of the clients that I work with, because, when many of my clients reference from a particularly conservative religious culture. And I think this is the case in any respect, but when you do reference from a culture like that, the topic of sex in general, as you and I have discussed, right, kind of has that mystique feeling to it almost, kind of that taboo feeling going on. And I find that many of my clients, in fact, probably most of them, have never really sat down and examined the healthiness or the toxicity in the sexual relationship. And it doesn't just fall to addicts. This is just in general. We all kind of go into marriage, it seems like, or many of us, with this idea of what it's going to be and what it should be, quote unquote, but oftentimes don't have those conversations and look at it. So I'm stoked for this. It's going to be good.
I don't know. I'm getting kind of nervous. I don't know if I want to talk about this.
That's a bad sign.
I'm just kidding. Can we talk about this? Are you sure?
Oh yeah, we can, and we are. I know. Well, and I know that there are some people, right, who sometimes are a little put off by us jumping in the bedroom with you, and we try not to do that too much, and we do it in a healthy way when we do. But obviously, you can only talk so much about sex addiction without really kind of hitting on the elements of it. And so I'm excited to look at this, because this is, if anything, the goal here, guys, on this podcast is you guys and gals, is to start this discussion in your marriage if it hasn't happened yet, and if it has, maybe we can deepen it and enhance it and get you guys more on the same page of what that looks like, because sex is very much in the eye of the beholder, right, in terms of if it's connecting versus not. As we've used examples many times on this podcast in the past, if somebody were to look at a couple being sexual on the outside, you can't really tell necessarily what, if what's going on is healthy or connecting. It might, or versus toxic, because it has so much to do with that internal mindset. Where is my headspace at? What am I taking from this? I mean, all those things, and we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah.
And in order to really get into that, I think we have to start with a discussion about lust and fantasy versus the healthy sex drive, right? And separating those between those two. curious for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, in fact, I was just talking to my group therapy guys recently about this very issue because it's hard. There's some confusion out there about lust, right? Lust is
Sure.
a religious and a philosophical term. It's bantered
Uh-huh.
around a lot.
Yes.
You know, what does it mean? And for me, over the years, I've kind of boiled it down to a pretty simple definition. For me, it would be the unnatural and unhealthy application of a natural drive,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
right? So and lust just isn't related to sex. You can lust after anything.
Yes.
So for example, there's the lust of money.
Mm.
In fact, I'll use that really quick as an example. So let's say that uh, we've got somebody who they work hard, they like nice things, they like to make money. It's a healthy drive. They're honest in what they do for their work, and they have been able to keep that drive to make money and have nice things in balance with other aspects of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the drive to have that is a healthy natural thing.
Yeah.
But now what happens if I start to lust after money and nice things? Now I see what other people have and I want it. And I don't just want it, I want it now. And I don't want to
Mm.
pay the price. I don't want to do the hard work. I don't want to adhere to the boundaries. I just want to go get it. And that's an example of going from a natural drive to one of lust. We can
Mm.
lust after money, power. We can, of course, have sexual lust. I like to say we can lust after food, which is called gluttony. I've had food lust issues in my
Mm.
life, and so lust is just the unnatural or unhealthy pursuit of something that is normally a healthy thing. And so I don't know what your feelings are about that, but that's how I've tried to kind of boil it down over the years.
No, I love that definition. I like that, and I think we're pretty close to on the same page with that. I've not thought about it maybe in that exact terminology, but my philosophy very much agrees. When I think of lust, at least in a sexual sense, because I agree it can apply across the board. But in a sexual sense, what I tend to how I look at, well, there's multifacets to it, right? The first thing that comes to mind is that lust is a stripping away of everything else but the sexual,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
So it's taking so there's a minimizing of all the other parts of the of connection and a maximizing of that one piece. It is no secret that sex is an important part in a marriage, far more frankly than I was taught in my conservative culture that it is. At least just physicality in general. But that being said, it cannot be the thing in a healthy marriage that leads out and drives the wagon. It's a good emphasis, but in and of itself is not a gauge for connection. The other element with lust, because there is such an emphasis on sex, lust is very much focused on things like body parts, sexual positions, frequency of sex, how long it lasts. I mean, all of those components. It's all about. There's this huge emphasis on yeah, how would I put it? It's just an emphasis on all things physical, and it's not, again, that isn't important, but it's not taking into account, right, all of those other elements.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing. When I'm in a lust, this is probably the best litmus test that I can come up with. When I'm in a lust-based mentality, my thinking is as follows: what can I get out of this?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's in that headspace of, I'm not thinking about, again, stripping away that connection. I'm not really thinking or even aware. It's not even on my radar to whatever degree I'm in lust, right? Of what's going on with my partner, how they're doing, whatever. It's all about me and what I want and what I can get from this. The last thing that comes to mind for me with lust is that it's always escape/numbing oriented. Even though that version of sex, just like any component of sex, like pornography, for example, it bills itself as connection, right? But that's the pornography paradox, is because it actually does the opposite. And I think lust does the same thing. It, on the outside, again, if somebody's looking in, they can look at that and be like, oh, wow, that couple, to an untrained therapist, I have worked with couples who are having sex, 10 times a week, for example. And it's easy for a therapist without the right training, or who doesn't take a look at that, to say, oh, well, this marriage can't be that bad. I mean, look how, intimate these guys are. They're so close, and they got a healthy sex life and da 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 da. But if there isn't that connective factor to back that up, if you gauge it just on something like that, I've seen those situations actually be very toxic, where you have two partners that are just using each other. Now, they're not drawing closer together 10 times a week. They're actually separating further and further, and the relationship is not symbiotic. It's actually parasitic, because they're both looking to numb out whatever else is going on in their lives, as opposed to as opposed to sex being a forum where they can connect and be present with each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of brings us to this place. If you wanted to make a comparison with that, you ask yourself, are we triggering the addiction cycle
Mm-hmm.
when we come together in that setting in marriage, or are we initiating the connection cycle?
Yes.
And they're very, very different, right? The addiction cycle, in basic terms, means there's some external factor or internal factor that is stressing me out, putting me into a place where I feel discomfort. It could be bored, lonely, angry, stressed, tired, fearful, doubtful. I mean, the list goes on of what those
Mm-hmm.
negative emotions can be. And so now I'm feeling the need for some self-soothing, self-medication, escape, avoidance, right? I want to fix this, whatever this discomfort is. And now, lo and behold, I have this place I can run to, let's call it the marriage bed, and I
Yeah.
can go fix all this stuff that is uncomfortable for me, rather
Yes.
than facing the issues and what's really going on and getting under the surface in the core of those. I can just run to this place, and that starts a cycle, an addiction cycle, versus the connection cycle, which is a whole different deal.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk real quick about the connection cycle versus the addiction cycle I just gave.
Yeah, I mean the connection cycle is going to have to do with a lot of the concepts, right? And this is a good way to kind of recognize it. A lot of the concepts that we've discussed on this podcast before, but so I'll run through kind of the things that stick out to me. And forgive me if this sounds a little bit like the Beatitudes from the Bible, but if we're looking at real connection, right, or healthy sex, first of all, is patient. Healthy sex, I'm a big believer, is an expression of an already existing relationship and level of connection, rather than or more so of that, rather than an attempt to find it or to create it. Obviously, it can
Mm,
enhance and grow it. But what I'm doing, if I'm in a healthy sexual place, what I'm doing in the bedroom is going to be reflective of that connection that I'm feeling, as opposed to trying to ignore the lack thereof and somehow either create or at least synthesize or mimic that to some degree, if that makes sense. So there's a patience factor,
yeah, we're going
right?
to talk more about that towards the end of this podcast today. But I like to say that when it's connecting, it's a culmination or a celebration of all the other ways that we're connecting before we ever get to the bedroom.
Absolutely. Lust is, and this goes back to the neuroscience of this, right? We touch on that from time to time. The sex drive is based in the midbrain, right? The reptilian brain. It's part of the instinctual portion of the brain that just operates the way that it does, and that's not a bad thing. But you can see reflections of how the midbrain works with being, again, instinctual, reactive, right? Something that is very needs driven, being reflected in lust if it's operating solely from that place. So again with we use that, that expression of being patient. Lust is, I call it, it's like the New Yorker on steroids, right? Lust wants everything yesterday, right? It like wanted it like 2 days ago. Like there is no this concept of like, let's get in a good place or let's have a healthy relationship, and then let's let the sex come as it does, right? And that's an important part of it for me too. Again, something to look for, where the sex isn't organic and it's just a natural flowing or outgrowing of the relationship, as opposed to the other, which is, what's the end goal is sex, right? How do I get there? How do I get there? How do I get there? I need to get flowers. I need to do a date. Maybe I need to take her out to a really nice restaurant. Maybe I need to, if I do enough things, maybe that'll lead to sex, right? It kind of becomes
Mm,
that more end game,
yep.
and definitely feeds into that addiction cycle, right? Contrast that with the connecting side, where the emphasis truly is not just because it sounds nice, but truly is on enjoying the company with the other person, right? Being able to be on the same page and to discuss and to interact and to build and grow on a substantial level. And the sex, in my experience, tends to be, if it is healthy, tends to be an outgrowth of that, right?
Yeah, I like that. Um, and talking about the issue of lust, one of the things, I mean, I know this about my marriage years when I was deep in addiction, and I see this with my clients all the time. Lust can really be a poison that we bring into the bedroom,
Yes.
and it can really create a great deal of disruption to the relationship, both conscious and subconscious.
Mm,
You might not even realize what kind of damage that it's doing to your relationship, simply because there are cultural expectations. You were raised that way. You just assume that this is the way it's done, but there's some part of you that just feels that it isn't right. It's
mm,
There's something that, yeah, this isn't really comfortable, but I guess this is what you have to do, or you're supposed to do, or what have you. And all that time, it is really poisoning, bringing something destructive into that relationship. And so one of the things I remember I struggled with, well, isn't everything sexual, if it's inside marriage, is legal, is appropriate, is fine?
yeah.
I even kind of being put off by people who wanted to talk to me about that. It's like, wait a second, that's none of your business.
Mm,
That's my marriage bedroom, and what we do there is our business. So just keep out of it. I would get
yeah.
angry, mainly now as I look back, mainly because I knew something, I wasn't approaching it in the most healthy way. So
Mm,
let's not talk about it, because then some things might actually be revealed
yeah.
that I didn't want to face. But this concept of, well, if it's within marriage, then it's whatever we say it is. It's fine. Everything within the marriage is healthy. And I've actually found that is not the case.
Yeah.
And we talked before this in some of our notes about a really tough concept for some guys: how your spouse can be a trigger for lust.
Yeah.
Your spouse is a lust trigger. And when I first started working with the guys, they're like, wait a second, what are you saying? My spouse is a trigger for lust? And there's a lot of resistance to that.
Mm,
And that might be a good thing to talk about for a couple of minutes, just about this concept of lust, being a poison we bring into the bedroom. How can
yeah.
a spouse be a trigger for lust? Really?
Oh, I was watching a sitcom some time ago, and it's I guess I can't probably mention that for copyright reasons, right? But it's the son of the show's all about the psychiatrist, and his father lives with him, and this particular episode is kind of dealing with generational differences between sex versus his more modern generation versus the older one. And for I almost said his name.
Yeah, you almost did.
The psychiatrist, he actually discloses on his radio show some elements of his dad's kind of thoughts on sex and relationships, and the dad doesn't appreciate it, and they're arguing. And the dad, at some point in time in the conversation, says, where I come from, sex is between you and the person you're doing it to. Right. And it's kind of a comical take on a more serious topic, because that phrasing carries weight in a lot of different arenas. But when you ask me, can my spouse be a lust trigger, or can my partner be a lust trigger? I would say the answer is absolutely yes. Right. Um, and this concept, I think, has a lot to do with something that we've already talked about. Is that, you remember when one of our first episodes, I think it was episode number 2, was what's the definition of pornography?
Mm-hmm.
Right? My wife walking out of the shower, for example, could either be very pornographic to me, or could be very connecting to me and very healthy. And the difference, I think, between the two is it comes back to this intention piece, right? It's what is my existing headspace, and what is my brain taking from that interaction, right? What is the end goal? What am I looking at it for? If I see my partner naked, am I present and appreciating that element of them in addition to everything else, or is the emphasis placed solely on that and taking something from that interaction? If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah. What's your focus?
Yeah.
Is it all me centered?
Yeah.
Right. We see that image of the spouse, and now we start thinking about what I'm going to get, what I'm going to do, how good it's going to be for me.
Yeah.
And or is it a feeling of uh, appreciation, respect, you know, all kinds of ways that become part of the cement or glue in our relationship, only because it's part of everything else that I'm feeling as a connection. As I've gotten healthier, that's what I've noticed. Those kinds of situations that many years ago would have been, my wife in too many cases was kind of could be pornography in
Sure.
my mind.
Yes.
And let's be very clear about that. When we
Of
say your
course.
spouse can be a lust trigger, doesn't mean that your spouse is doing something wrong.
Nope. Has nothing to do with that.
It's all about how you're filtering it through your own brain and how you're interpreting it.
Correct.
And there were times where I was filtering it that way.
Yeah.
Now I find it's a wonderful addition to or part of all the other things, and that's why it's so connecting, because it reminds me of all the other ways that we're close.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just such a difference of that very narrowed, singular, me-centered, lust approach versus, wow, we really do have something. And
Yeah.
this just reminded me of that.
Yeah. Is sex something between me and the person I'm being intimate with my partner, or is sex between me and the person I'm doing it to?
The person I'm doing it
Right.
to, I know.
Right. Kind of. That's you're absolutely right. I agree. And that kind of brings up, and I know we're kind of bouncing around with these characteristics of healthy versus toxic sex, so forgive us, but that's another piece that comes to mind for me. A hallmark of any 12-step program centered around sex, addiction or compulsion, be it pornography or what have you. I feel a key component of any one that works is starting off with the premise that sex is optional. It is
Mm,
not a requirement for a relationship. It's a great expression and is an important part of a marriage and something to be worked on, but it is not a requirement for happiness in and of itself. And it sounds really, honestly, kind of weird to say this as a sex addict, because I remember so clearly my whole world in many respects revolving around the intimacy. And it wasn't just the orgasm or just the physical pleasure side. I was just gauging the whole relationship by it, right? If we were having lots of sex, we must have a really good marriage. If we're not having any sex at all, we must not have a good marriage at all. And so it tends to be, and so for me, keeping that in mind is important. A good litmus test for me is if I feel right now like I need to have sex, I probably need to go do some work, because it shouldn't be
mm.
something that I have to have right now. Is it a great thing that I'd like to have as a part of my life? Absolutely. And I think it is a part of a healthy, balanced marriage diet.
Yeah.
But yeah, it shouldn't be the end all be all. And I should, if I can, I use a phrase that I borrowed from a movie with guys when we're talking about this topic, and I really really like it. And it's this, when it comes to sex, if sex is one of those things where if you're not enough without it, or your relationship's not enough without it, you'll never be enough with it,
Mm,
and the marriage will never be enough with it.
yes.
Right? If I can't have a healthy relationship without having sex X amount of times a week or X amount of times a month or whatever, there are other parts of the relationship that need to be built up.
Hey, everybody. Mark and Steve here. Are you looking to take your recovery and your marriage to the next level?
We work with individuals and couples one-on-one.
With both in-person and online therapy options, you have access to the experts anytime, anywhere.
To learn more, visit us at pbscpodcast.com.
Yeah, and this kind of comes into this place where we talk about our spouse can become a drug for
Yes.
us. Every time life gets unmanageable or difficult or stressful or whatever, I can go running to my spouse to have sex, quote, and it's like a drug. And this is one of the things as I started to get into recovery and was willing to become more aware of this. I would recognize some of the boundaries that I would set for myself in healthy recovery. One of the ways that I knew that I was getting into this place of lust and me-centeredness with regard to sexual intimacy is if I had an expectation that there was going to be this great sex and I was looking forward to it, I was running it through my mind, I was anticipating,
Mm-hmm.
and then for some reason it didn't work out.
Sure.
My wife was not feeling well. It got too late. There was some crisis with the kids, whatever it was. And then it
Yeah.
didn't happen. If I found myself being angry, moody, throwing a bit of a little tantrum,
Mm.
right? This big giant
Yep.
letdown. And then I'm like a little spoiled child who's just not, gotten what he expected. When I would feel that, that would cause me to pause and go, whoa, I think I have some more work to do with regard to my recovery because I'm feeling really angry and resentful at my wife that things didn't work out
Yes.
tonight the way I hoped. That's the
Yeah.
same kind of mechanism you see with people who, for example, are hooked on drugs. They're anticipating that they're going to go out drinking, or they're anticipating that they're going to get their heroin or their cocaine, and something happens where they don't get access to it. And now all of these really impulsive, reactive emotions start flooding them, where they
Yeah.
were disappointed in the expectation. It's the same kind of effect. It's a drug I was craving. It didn't happen, and now I'm angry. I'm resentful. I'm throwing a tantrum of sorts.
Hmm.
For me, that's been a big sign for me. Like, can you take it or leave it? Can you be patient? Can you be kind? Can you err on the side of your spouse's feelings or where she's at right now, and then just you know put it forward to another time? Or
Mm-hmm.
are you going to make her pay
Yeah.
because this didn't happen the way I expected?
Sure.
You know.
Oh,
So
absolutely, absolutely. Well, and like any other part of like any other part of a relationship, communication in this area is everything, right? And that branches across all sorts of different spectrums. I mean, the first one that comes to mind is, I mean, I'm really shocked how many of my clients have been having sex with each other for years, but like have never really talked about it. It happens all the time, but it just happens, right? It's not really a topic of discussion. They've never sat down and had that discussion about, what is healthy, what isn't, what do I like, what do I not, what makes me uncomfortable, what helps me feel connected, right? All of those things. It
oh
just
yeah,
it's
it's
it's it's pretty
it
wild.
it's like the part that's so crazy about that is you go back to when you were a kid, and I'll ask groups, so how many of you when you were growing up had the talk?
Yep.
Right? The one talk with your mom or your
Yeah.
dad about this thing called sex. And a lot of the some of the group will never had the talk. It was just never discussed at all. But a lot of them will say, "Yep, I remember the talk."
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because as dysfunctional and awkward and embarrassing and whatever else that is, we carry that with us into our marriage relationship. It's like,
Absolutely.
have you ever really had just a raw, real, authentic talk with your spouse about your sexual relationship? And most of the couples I've ever worked with, the answer is no. It's
Mm-hmm.
just not done. It's just too embarrassing. It's too awkward. Nobody ever showed me or told me how to do it, and I'm just too uncomfortable. So all
Yeah.
this stuff goes unsaid, unexpressed, and you bring it into the bedroom, and it's going to create lots of dysfunction because you won't say what you need or what's not comfortable or I don't really like that or whatever it is. you
Yeah.
can't if you can't voice that, all sorts of assumptions are going to happen and all sorts of habits are going to be developed that you just sort of put up with because you've never bothered to actually face it and confront it. It's dysfunctional and just in every way you can imagine.
Yes.
Wait, you've never talked about that?
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Absolutely.
wow.
Yeah, it can be I mean, and like you said, I mean, I agree. It isn't just about necessarily even what you like and what you don't. It's about comfort level.
Yeah.
Like anything else, right? In a marriage, there are certain boundaries. I'm a big believer, right? There are certain behaviors on opposite either end of the spectrum, whether we're talking about shame, whether we're talking about manipulation, whether we're talking whatever, where there are certain things in communication or in the way that we interact or with each other that are always going to be out of bounds, that will always be manipulative, that are always problematic, right?
Right.
That being said, though, there is a lot of wiggle room for what a marriage looks like from couple to couple, right?
Yeah.
What may be healthy for one couple in the bedroom, for example, may not exactly be the same thing that would be healthy for another couple for all sorts of reasons, ranging from past addiction behaviors that are just overly triggering, all the way up through maybe a spouse has been abused in the past sexually or had some
Yes.
sexual trauma from
Yes.
prior partners or from abuse. And if those things aren't talked about or discussed, I mean, what a tragedy that would be. I have had more than one client where a wife has opened up about her having a sexually traumatic past, but because of her shame and fear around being judged around it, she's never mentioned it to a spouse.
Yeah.
And come to find out that, the husband has been thinking they've had this really healthy sexual relationship all these years, and in many ways it's been connecting, but she on her end of the spectrum, she's been having this fear, this underlying anxiety with it, that she hasn't been able to, she's never talked about. And so even though the experience for her is pleasurable, it's also very painful. And that could be avoided, right? Those kinds of situations are easily avoidable if you can take this topic just like any other and spin it on its head. You said something really telling about how we look at this in our culture, right? Everybody knows what we mean when we say the talk, right?
Yes.
Everybody knows what that means, right? And that right there is a problem. First of all, it's shocking how many people never get the talk from parents, from whoever. But even more so, it's sad because even in that small percentage that do get the talk, that's the problem. It is a talk. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be an ongoing
Yeah.
conversation.
It's an event instead of,
Yes.
right, an ongoing dialogue
Hey,
of
whoa, 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 whoa,
sharing.
whoa. We talked about this when we first got married. I don't know why we're bringing this up again.
Yeah. Why?
Why are you asking me what why are you trying to tell me what you're sexually comfortable with? We talked about this at 21. We're in our 40s now.
Yeah.
I think I know you pretty well,
Yeah.
right?
Remember
Like,
that?
yeah, this stuff changes and evolves over time. And that is the case with any relationship. But I know for the vast majority of people listening, this is a recovery oriented relationship where, just like every other area, your relationship is likely in a place of rapid flux, rapid change. And just like anything else in the relationship, it has to be something that has to be an ongoing, or things can go awry really, really quick. Case in point, I have had more than one client who, they're, as a couple is working through, addiction and betrayal and everything like that. I have had clients come to find out, like my wife clients, for example, in their own individual work, that there was actually some emotional abuse and manipulation, and sometimes physical abuse and manipulation far greater than what they recognized at the time, right? And some of those experiences they had may have been manipulative or may even fall under a classification of some level of rape. And if you aren't having discussions in your marriage about those topics, as you both move through the recovery process, because you never know when those are going to come up, you can make or break a relationship on any topic in it. One of the quickest ones is around intimacy, because
Yeah.
it's one of those places of high vulnerability. And if you take big missteps in this area, you can do damage that is very, very difficult to repair.
Yeah. And you mentioned a really important aspect is that the woman in the marriage can, uh, when you start talking about that, she can look back and say, "Wow, I didn't even realize that was abuse. I knew it didn't feel right. I knew there was something that was wrong, but I didn't feel I could express it. I was embarrassed or intimidated or whatever. I was just never shown how to do it. And so now this can come flooding in currently." I've also seen another side of that. Us as guys, we're raised in this man culture that says, I can't talk about my fear about
Mm,
performing. I can't
sure.
talk about the inadequacies that I feel sexually,
Yeah.
because then I'm not the macho man.
Sure.
And a lot of guys, when they come to the place where they're actually able to admit, you know what, I just have some real insecurities about this. I didn't, I didn't feel like I was, competent in this or capable. And I was afraid to tell you. And man, I would get anxiety or I would be embarrassed or, the list goes on, all
Yeah,
because we couldn't talk about it. So guys carry that burden, that secret burden as well.
very true.
Yeah.
Very true. No, you're absolutely right. I think, this goes back to some of those sexual mores in our, that we have in our cultural, generally speaking, right? Men are just sexual pigs, and because of that, that carries a lot of different weight in different areas, and women are not sexual at all. I mean, there's just all sorts of things that you hear on a daily basis, and
Yes.
and those things influence the relationship. It's really interesting because when you grow up in a culture where sex is talked about so little in a vulnerable way, where do we learn sexual norms from? Sitcoms like the one I described,
Yep.
right? TV,
Yep. Media,
movies,
our peers,
and it's
pornography.
and it's pretty dangerous to set a precedent in your marriage about defining certain elements of intimacy from something that is geared towards selling movie tickets.
Yeah.
Because there are lots of things that happen in the movies, including in the sexual realm, that will sell a lot of movie tickets, but that are actually horrible advice for real life.
Yes.
We could do like 5 podcast episodes on that, but we won't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's finish up and maybe give people a few guidelines, some insights and suggestions. How do you have this conversation as a couple?
Absolutely.
If you're gonna sit down and talk about this, really intense and potentially awkward topic,
Hmm.
how do you
Yes.
do it without
Yes.
creating more problems?
Yeah,
Right.
right. Well, and I love that, and we'll get into that. Before I mention that, though, a thought that came to mind that I think is really important is, and this is again applicable across the board in other areas of intimacy, but in the sexual realm, in addition to the others, if you want to have a healthy sexual experience, you have to come into it with your bucket already full.
Yes.
If you don't want to be subject or pulled into lust, which anybody can be subject to, but addicts can slip into that mindset in about a cold second. A prerequisite to that is you have to have taken the time to fill that bucket first with that self-care piece.
Yes. See, the last thing you want is to come to that sexual relationship in your marriage needy.
Yes.
I'm empty, and I'm looking for you to fill me in this sexual situation.
Best case, that's highly codependent and destructive for the relationship in other ways. Worst case, it is going to feed into the addiction mindset.
Yes.
Your spouse cannot be looked at subconsciously or consciously as that refuge in the desert, that you're the oasis in the desert that you go to just fill your bucket up with so you can then go and isolate again for however long.
Yes.
You have to be taking that time to connect so that you can, because if you're a healthy sexual experience, just like any other part of the relationship, is one where you can give. There's a give and take. And if you haven't taken the time to fill, you're not going to have anything left. You're not going to have anything to give.
Yep. You're just going to take.
Yes.
And then that comes down to one other important point that I often bring up. If you want to have a great sexual relationship, it's not about the techniques, the positions, the toys, the this, the that. It's about everything that you bring with you to that experience.
Yes.
So all the things you're
Absolutely.
doing outside the bedroom have everything to do with the kind of quality and connection and intimacy that you're going to experience, during that time. So am I respectful? Am I doing my part? I like to tell guys, great sex starts in the kitchen. And of course they laugh because they don't know what I'm talking about. I say, no. Do you do the dishes? Do you take out the trash? Do you help fix dinner? Do you clean off the counters?
Absolutely.
That is a part of what you bring with you into that intimate setting.
Totally.
So that, if you want to have that be a wonderful part of your relationship, then focus on all the things that are happening outside that place.
Mm-hmm.
So critical.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely. Okay. Well, getting to an assignment for the week. So, I think the assignment's going to be the same no matter where you're at on the spectrum. The point is to deepen the conversation around sex and this concept of healthy versus toxic sex in general. Okay. Wherever you're at, some couples obviously have been more open about that, and maybe it's more of a deepening of that discussion or a checking in with it we haven't talked about in a while. But for others, this may be the first time you ever breach the subject. Again, it's not uncommon for a couple to be married for 20 years. And I will ask them in my office, have you ever talked about this? And they haven't.
Yeah, I
And
know.
so just opening that discussion and just starting to practice normalizing it. Okay. Like anything else associated with recovery, and this applies for addicts just as much as to spouses, just because something is sacred, which I would argue sex is, we talk about this in the book, it does not mean that it should also be secret. Those are
Right.
different. And being able to bring up that topic, just like any other, is critical. You need to be able to normalize those discussions, and so that they don't carry that shame baggage or that naivety baggage or whatever else it may be. Um, and so just beginning that conversation, and then along with that, making sure that you're seeking correct information, right? And dispelling the crap. There are lots of resources out there for this, and I'm going to give a caveat because I've never found one that I completely agree with everything that's contained therein. But I'm a certified sex addiction therapist, and there's a colleague of mine. Her name is Dr. Alexandra Katahakis, and she wrote a book called Erotic Intelligence: Igniting Hot, Healthy Sex While in Recovery from Sex Addiction. I've trained under her. She's a really good lady, very smart with her stuff. Again, there are some things in there around certain topics that you may find that don't work for you. Like anything else in recovery, take what you need and leave the rest. There are other books out there, but that would be the one that I would give with, again, some caveats that way. So that's where I would say we start.
Yeah, and the other side that I would just put on this as we end, be patient with each other.
Mm.
This is not, you're not going to be an expert at this conversation,
Yes.
the first time. You're going to stumble over your words. It's going to be embarrassing, awkward. You might even get angry at each other, one or more of you. Whatever you're feeling, whatever emotions come bubbling up as you're trying to do this, it's okay.
Yes.
Whatever you're feeling is okay.
And
Just be,
maybe,
yeah, go ahead.
oh no, I was just going to say, maybe that conversation where it needs to start is just talking about the fears,
Yeah.
right? Maybe we just start having a discussion about why this discussion is scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great place to begin, you
Yeah.
know?
Here's why this scares me to death, or here's why I'm just so awkward right now. I cannot even tell you.
I have been
Like,
getting naked with you for 20 years, but
we
I
can't,
can't I
yeah.
can't do it emotionally.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about it.
And so absolutely. Well, awesome. Well, I think that's about it, unless we got anything else to add.
I think that's good. Just be
Sounds great.
patient. It's a process. Keep going, keep trying, and it'll get better. Take the risk and it'll get better with time.
We know it's a difficult conversation, guys. And so, as always, please visit us at www.pbsepodcast.com. We've got a contact form on there. You're welcome to reach out to us for anything, ranging from therapy options in both of our practices up through just topics that you would like to cover in future podcasts. If you have questions about today, I know we covered like a massive topic, as always, in 30 minutes. And so we do tailor future episodes to that. So take that into account, and please let us know how it's going.
All right. Sounds good.
Have a great week, everybody.
See ya. That's all for today. Thanks for joining us. And remember, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. Together, we can do the impossible.
To learn more about Mark and Steve and to listen to more podcast episodes, visit us at pbsepodcast.com. Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.